Welcome to Let's Be Well Together podcast. We're your wellness check-in team. Join us each week or when you can. We enjoy exploring wellness concepts and reminding you to make time for wellness.
This is episode 169.
You are listening to Let's Be Well Together. It's John Webster here with Riley Thompson. Hi, Riley.
Hi.
When I studied philosophy, I was interested in ethics, and at one point I was studying about punishment theory. And then obviously I went to law school. I took a lot of criminal law courses. I found it very interesting. And so you've said that you're interested in a lot of topics that kind of touch on this. Thought we could maybe come back to these kind of topics once every 3 or 4 months or so. So what's the first one? What's the first one you'd like to talk about in this chain?
In this chain, I figured we'd start off nice and light with the not guilty by reason of insanity defense. I know some people are going to go like, oh my God, I was supposed to have some relaxing podcast to listen to. But,
yeah, I mean, that's not light, but
yeah.
But no, it's very interesting. So what are you thinking?
Well, I never took criminal law. I never took law, never took any of that. I'm purely a psychology girl through and through, but still, it's just the whole ethics and the stigma around mental health, about the not guilty by reason of insanity. All of those components tied together are really interesting to me. And I think there's some really fascinating questions that we could try to dig into a little bit with that.
I have thought quite a bit about this in different contexts, so I probably do have things to say, but where would you like to start?
I mean, the biggest one that comes to mind, and probably the most obvious / polarizing question, is how society should treat individuals with mental illnesses who commit crimes. Should we focus more on the rehabilitation and mental health care or punishment?
Yeah, so I think you're starting to get into punishment theory already before there's even a conviction. So I'll answer your kind of second part and then come back to the first. And the second part is, I think when people think about punishment, they have to think about who's involved. And if you focus too much on the criminal, and what's the purpose for punishment vis-a-vis the criminal, then you start talking about things like either deterrence or rehabilitation. But what about the victim? And, and that's something I think a lot of people forget, which is there's a victim to crime. And if you don't punish in some form, are you in some way telling the victim that they're not worth it? That doesn't have anything to do with the criminal and what happens with a criminal after conviction.
Yeah, whenever I see something in the news about someone who, air quotes here, got off by reason of insanity, I always wonder where the threshold is, like what deems somebody insane by the criminal justice system. Like, I know clinically what makes somebody insane because it's what I'm taught throughout my undergrad of just the varying degrees of mental illness. But then even still, you have people who are suffering from mild depression, who may still have the capacity to make rational decisions. But then you also have people who are experiencing serious psychosis, and they may not fully understand the consequences of their own actions. So, are you going to treat those two people like they're the same? Or, where is that threshold?
Okay, just to be clear too, though, what I was talking about was if somebody is convicted of having done a crime, and so I was not taking into account somebody who was not guilty by reason of insanity. So let's back up then. And I don't practice in criminal law, and I probably forgot most of what I learned in law school, but I can give you some general outlines about what the issue is. Criminal law, generally speaking, is meant to address people doing things that they should either know is wrong or should know that is risky and could create problems. And there's something called mens rea. MENSREA.
I just read about that.
Yeah. So you can read about that. And the issue with not guilty by reason of some type of mental illness, one of the main questions I think they ask is, does the person appreciate the nature of their act and the potential consequences? And so if somebody actually is, for example, having a psychosis or does something without recognizing what they're doing or the consequences or that it's wrong, if they can't appreciate that what they're doing is, air quotes, wrong, then they really don't have the mens rea. They don't have the subjective component of criminal law that's required. And that's different than thinking about the victim, because obviously we feel terrible for the victim, but if somebody indeed doesn't have the mental component, it's unfortunate what happened, but convicting the person in a criminal law context when they didn't have the right state of mind, that's a whole other issue. And that's why sometimes they're not convicted. Now, most of the times, in those situations, people do get treatment. Like they don't just walk out the door.
Mm-hmm.
They're sent for treatment. And sometimes that could be even worse because sometimes you're put into a facility on an indefinite basis.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, that's the point. You need mens rea.
Mm-hmm.
You need subjective intent. You need subjective understanding, appreciating what you did was wrong. And so in certain types of mental disease, mental illness, you don't have those qualities when you do some of your acts.
Yeah. It still does sound kind of, I don't want to say silly, but like that there is just those pieces of criteria that they need to meet. Mens rea, subjective understanding of what's good and bad.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
those are all,
like
they're all intertwined. It's not like all these different elements you have to prove. But
no, I know.
And I think the problem largely too that we run into is that it's easy to abuse this. I remember when I was in law school many years ago, there was an issue of somebody who was sleepwalking. They killed somebody when they were sleepwalking. However, in the process of so-called sleepwalking, they got out of their bed, went outside, got into their car, drove to a family member's house, killed them, went back home and went back to sleep. And it just so happened that somebody called a really top-notch criminal defense lawyer the same night who went directly to the person to talk to them in jail and just happened to find out they were sleepwalking. And, and everyone's like, well, if that happened, I suppose, but it's really hard to believe. And secondly, with a seasoned defense counsel who is feeding the idea, I think a lot of times part of the problem associated with the defense of not guilty by reason of mental health issues is that we don't believe it.
Well, that was kind of my next, I have it in my series of notes of, is it an appropriate way to prioritize mental wellness or mental health? Is it appropriate, or does it just allow for excuse, or is it abused? Like, again, with the threshold.
And I think a lot of people too, like a lot of people might just say, hey, if you do something bad, you should be punished. I don't care about your mental health. But a lot of other people, and I would put myself in the latter category, would be like, well, it is important that the person have a certain state of mind before we find them criminally responsible. And I can't remember. I think there was a case in the last decade where it was a really tragic case where somebody attacked someone on a bus in a really bad way that I won't say. And
I think I read about that.
And I think they may have been found not guilty in that fashion. And they did go to an institution and eventually they were treated, and eventually with medication they were released.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it just kind of...
For a lot of people, that's not justice though, right? Like to some it is. Okay, that person, was rehabilitated and they got the treatment that they needed to live a healthy life. And then other people say, no, that family, that's not enough for that family. They deserve more justice than that.
Yeah, I know. And I'll give you another example. Let's say that I'm driving and totally on some innocent basis, like, I don't know, I sneezed or something and I lose sight of the car and I get in an accident because there's just some kind of weird thing that I did and it kills somebody. And compare that to I'm on my phone. And because I'm on my phone and distracted, I have the same accident. In both cases, there's a tragedy. A terrible tragedy where someone got killed.
But in one case, there's more intent than the other.
Or at least there's more carelessness. And that's what we're getting at here, because if indeed somebody has the mental health situation that they literally aren't able to process what's going on in front of them and they don't know that what they're doing is wrong, kind of like, the first example, whereas if you have some kind of mental issues, but not to that extent, and you do something that you should know might hurt somebody, different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as someone who's never studied law, it truly just baffles me that that's written into the system. That one little exception. And it's called insanity. That's what they decided to call it, by reason of insanity.
Oh, is that what the law says?
Yeah.
Maybe
Well, I guess that's the verdict, I guess, right? Like, that's what you hear people say, oh, they're guilty or not guilty by reason of insanity. Like, who decided that that was an appropriate way to categorize abnormal mental behavior or mental processes?
Yeah.
Like,
well, look back to, I mean, they called them insane asylums.
Yeah,
it doesn't have a great history, and a lot of the criminal law is centuries old or very old. So,
yeah, it really is wild.
No, but whenever you get into these kind of issues, for sure, you could take different conversations in the context of social wellness, in the context of spiritual wellness. If you start talking about moral codes and criminal codes, obviously,
yeah, I think spiritual wellness is a big one, at least with this.
Yeah, because for me, like, I'm not a religious person, so when I think of spirituality, one of the things I think about is living by a code, living by some kind of code in my life, appreciating right and wrong. And so, like, for some people, they turn to religion, but to me, spiritual does include things related to criminal law.
I've actually never thought of it that way. I think I just had like an aha moment, because I'm not also a religious person. I've always been not confused by religion, but always, I've always wanted to talk to someone like, oh, what brought you into your faith? Or like, how do you rely on your faith the way you do? There's a code.
Well, it could be. And so the way I came at it was,
most of the time anyways, there's a code.
For the most part, like, if you're Christian, your code is largely based on the Bible and stories you read. But the way I came across it was, I was trying to think, well, look, I'm not religious. I want to talk to myself about spiritual wellness. So what does that mean? And so I just started doing internet searches and reading and thinking. And some of the things that came to mind are, recognizing there are things beyond myself and recognizing connections with other people and with a planet and with the universe, and having a code of conduct of sorts. These are all things I found that people tie into kind of a spiritual wellness. So I'm not saying it's like a substitute for religion. I'm just saying, like, for me, when people talk about things like ethics and how to live your life and kind of a sense of a code, to me, I'm talking about spiritual wellness.
Yeah, I guess from non-religious person to non-religious person, it kind of it clicked for me a little bit that I do understand you're not referring to it as a substitute, but it kind of just made me realize, oh, maybe that could be what a lot of people see who are religious, that maybe is kind of what they view it as is like a set of morals or a code to live by, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we're going to have to come back to this, because I'm not sure how far we got.
How did we?
But we're pretty much out of time. So I think, just talking about that code is maybe a good way to end it.
Yeah.
Guests are giving their time, expanding our minds. Today's interview is in the category of physical wellness. We speak with the author of the book Built to Last, David Amerland. Our focus today is on self-empowerment and personal responsibility. Hi, David.
John, hi. I'm so glad to be here today.
It was nice that we connected, because when I heard the things you were saying, so many of your themes resonate with ours. So I'm glad you are here. So David Amerland writes about how we grow stronger physically, mentally, and emotionally. In his books like Built to Last and The Sniper Mind, he blends neuroscience, fitness, and personal development into clear, actionable frameworks. He has a black belt in martial arts, and David draws from his training to explore motivation, resilience, and the power of movement to transform lives. He also writes on tech and strategy, including Google semantic search, helping professionals adapt in the digital age. Whether through writing or speaking, his goal is the same: to help people gain control of their lives, improve their health, and build habits that truly last. And so, David, I like a quote, and the quote is, "Solve the problem yourself or accept a fate you may not like." From this perspective, the ethic of personal responsibility gains appeal. And chapter 2 of your book, Built to Last, talks about empowerment and control. So I wanted to talk to you about that. Maybe we can start, in your view, how does exercise restore control in this context?
What an excellent question. Let's backtrack a few thousand years, right? We're coming out of the caves. The world around us is extremely hostile, and everything inside us is on high alert. From that moment on, basically, the only way that we can survive is by actually predicting the next moment. This is what the brain is designed to do. And the only way to do that is it synthesizes the massive amounts of data it has, and it guides our behavior to create the structures which we call civilization today. And that veneer of civilization gives us a little bit of predictability, especially in a developed country, which allows us to feel safe. Why do we need that feeling? Because if we do not have it, then the external world impacts our internal states. It creates a high level of anxiety, a chaotic environment internally, which over a period of time essentially shortens our life. And certainly, even in the short term, it impairs our function. We can't function logically, we can't function analytically, we can't make decent decisions. We're in a reactive mode, we're constantly exhausted. It is not a viable sort of situation to be in for a long-term survival strategy. So that's why it's important to have that sense of control. Now, how does exercise help us here? This is what it does. Essentially, exercise is a stressor that activates a number of internal states within us, which begin to go out of kilter. Our body then takes a number of countermeasures to bring it back into a homeostatic and acceptable base. And that allows us to create the flexibility we have to face future stressors, because we have become, for lack of another word, internally hardened to stressors.
I don't really hear exercise talked about so much in that context, but from what you're saying then, the work that we're putting our body through is creating a type of stress in our body, and our body's getting used to addressing that stress and getting past and through it.
Yes, it builds up a number of internal states. Let's call them grit, for example, a sense of capability, confidence in our way to move our body. If we have, for example, run, let's say 3 kilometers or 5 kilometers, and it's pushed us a little bit, and we got through it and we did it. Now, not only do we have the neurochemical capability to deal with that, but we've also built the internal circuitry in terms of how the different parts of the brain message each other when it comes to dealing with that stressor. Now, the brain doesn't have massive numbers of redundancy. So they're not different stressors which are going to deal with the stressful situation of a run, and then different stressors which are going to deal with the stressful situation of an everyday life situation. They're exactly the same kind of neurons. So if we have trained those neurons to react in a specific way to stress in a stressful environment, and we control them better, then they will react equally well in a different kind of stressful situation. And that's how we take the fitness, which is physical, and we make it also mental and psychological.
There's mention in your book of the stressor paradox. Can you help us understand what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. We know from countless studies that essentially we need to stress and push our body physically and mentally in order for us to become better human beings. And paradoxically, we are hardwired to avoid stresses.
Okay.
Because this is the paradox we're fighting against. This is why the figures when it comes to fitness across the world are so grim, despite the fact that we live in information age, and certainly we have no lack of access to physical plants, fitness instructors, gyms. They're all over the world, and they're still failing to actually make us fitter.
That is really my experience, because for most of my life, I did avoid exercise. And then for whatever reason, I got into it when I turned about 50, and it made me feel so amazing. And then going forward, I realized that pushing myself, exercising, not crazy because I like to do it in a sustainable way, but that kind of exercise was making me feel so good. And I wondered why. Like, why is it that we want to overeat? Why can't we just be designed that we only want to eat the right amount? But the hard work does pay off. Now,
it does, yeah.
If our minds are set in a certain way, if we tend to think in a certain way, do you have any ideas on how we might rewire the brain to work in a different way?
Absolutely, yeah. Of all the animals on the planet, we are the only ones with this kind of superpower. You can get a gorilla or a tiger or a lion, and they're amazing in what they can do, and that's it. It's set in stone, pretty much. But this is not the case for us. We can be strong, fast, aggressive, peaceful, creative, can be amazing. Our brain has the capability to basically reprogram itself. And this is what it takes for that. Although we have these amazing capabilities, the fundamentals are always the same. We need to have an emotional connection to what we're trying to achieve. And then we need to reevaluate the cost it'll take for us to get there. And this is what I mean by this. Let's bring it back to your example. You avoided exercise, and what you felt, this reticence when it comes to physical activity, is perfectly normal, and it's felt by everyone, even people who are fit and they train every day. They still feel it inside them. And what you did is what most people who successfully train actually do. You connected who you are to what you want to be, how you want to feel like. And then in that calculus, which says, okay, I'm going to undergo physical stress. It's going to cost me so much energy. It's going to cost me this kind of discomfort. You reevaluated that discomfort in terms of what it's going to give you. So you want to get that feeling of feeling good, but also you like the feeling of control it gives you over your body. You like the way it makes you feel in terms of your own confidence. So now that emotionality connected with what you're doing allows you to reevaluate the cost of the exercise while you're doing it, because you're getting something which is immeasurably better. And that's how we should go about it. Often we talk about our who and our why. Who are we really? Why we do things? And intellectually we know we should work these things out, but we don't normally unless we're actually forced to. Usually by age or some kind of situation in our life which creates a kind of psychological stressor. For exercise to really work for us, we really need to work that out. We need to work out who are we and why are we doing it. Once we truly understand that, then we're in a better position to actually reevaluate the things which we need to do in order to move forward with our fitness and our health.
The other interesting thing in my experience, which really surprised me, was I think I did go through all those thoughts that you're just describing. And the ultimate goal was to take steps, get better in touch with my physical self, sleep, eat well, exercise, all because I wanted to change the way I lived my life kind of after the exercise was done, right? Like I want to feel better.
Yes.
The really interesting experience to me was once I got more into it, when I am exercising, I feel this is my life. I am living my life. I'm not doing this to later live my life, but exercise is life. It's a part of it, just like the rest of the stuff we do. And meanwhile, the rest of the day when I'm doing other stuff, I feel better when I do it. So it's been a really kind of fun thing to learn.
Yeah. Kudos to you. I mean, that's the efficacy of the process, which allowed you to reevaluate that. So now you're undergoing a stressor, and you make that stress a part of the beauty of life, which certainly it is. Every time we undergo any kind of stress, our senses are heightened, our internal states go into a level of anxiety, so they go in alert. We are actually functioning at a higher, better level. It's just that usually we're stressed and we're too stressed to appreciate it. But once you reevaluate that, it's exactly what you say. You feel alive, which is amazing.
In your experience, this reevaluation, is it happening on a conscious level, a subconscious level, or both?
Well, most of the times it has to be conscious. Okay. And this is what happens. We are usually faced with some kind of situation which leads us into some sort of psychological mental block against a wall. It's a kind of crisis point. And in order for us to move forward from the crisis point, we need to reevaluate things. I mean, if we take any person off the street, we start discussing fitness and longevity and how important it is to lose weight and how important it is to move their body, they will 1000% agree with us. Logically, there's absolutely nothing they can say that will actually sort of refute these arguments. Would they keep them? No. Why? Because emotionally, they're not tied to it just yet. And this is the fallacy we have. There's a mechanism in our head called temporal discounting. From our present position where we are okay, we tend to underestimate the amount of work that it will take to get us fitter. And we tend to also underestimate the benefits we'll get from that because we feel okay now. Once we emotionally link that to what we do, then everything changes, the calculus changes. But for that to happen, we have to feel that conscious moment in our lives where things have to change. It has to be some kind of major stressor, which allows us to basically peel back some of the layers of our behavior and better understand where we need to go.
I think I'm getting a sense in terms of an answer to a question I'm about to ask, but maybe get a little more into it. Tell us about the concept of true empowerment being internal.
Okay, essentially, when it comes to our own our own internal states. We're very bad at actually assessing them. We are very reactive to the environment. And in most situations, we just go along with that. The external world constantly impacts upon us. If we want to feel that we're in control of us in our life, the first thing we must do is actually acknowledge that the external world impacts our body, and that brings out all sorts of processes, which then become sort of felt, and we become aware of them as emotions, which lead to thoughts, which will lead to some kind of action, whether we think about it or not. If we think about it, the action is going to be sort of premeditated. If we don't, it's going to be reactive. That kind of self-awareness comes from actually understanding that what we sense inside ourselves is a process which we cannot affect at some point in our life. And this is where that internal guidance or control comes in. This is where doing things which we can with our body, which is an external sort of device, affects the internal states, which affect our mind, affect our willpower, affect our psychology, and enable us to feel that we can actually guide our life through that kind of simple exercise. Typically, people who are physically active are happier because their internal states are more balanced. They are less reactive to the internal world. They have better emotional regulation. We know now for a fact that when we have better emotional regulation, we also can exercise higher executive function. So we have control over the impact of our emotions on our thinking, and our critical thinking is better. So our decisions are better. And if we take that on a cumulative basis throughout our life, we make slightly better decisions than everybody else. And that slightly better leads us to better outcomes consistently. Then we have a better life. We're fitter, we're healthier, we're wealthier. Whatever success measure you're going to put in place, the markers are actually there that we can achieve more with what we do.
I have not thought about things from that perspective, but it does make sense when you explain it that way. I guess just lastly, before I turn to the question we ask every guest, how do you see exercise being a form of medication?
Exercise essentially is a stressor we willingly undergo when we physical process we're doing, whether we lift or run or a combination of those, or we cycle, whatever physical activity we do. That external stressor then has a correlation in internal states, internal chemical states, which then impact pretty much everything about us. They affect our microbiome because they raise the temperature of the body. They change our hormonal profile. They change the messaging between the gut-brain axis, and they change how the brain itself, the neuronal, all the connections which go from the brain throughout the body, wire themselves up in order to function. Can we take medication to affect these things? Possibly, if we take some sort of anabolics to some extent, and some steroids. Certainly we can take medication to bring them down to some kind of acceptable base level when they're off kilter because we're ill. But exercise does all these things naturally. It raises the levels up to some acceptable sort of parameters. And from there, it strengthens the connection of the brain to control these things. And then it brings us down to a baseline, which allows us to function in a better way because we have created margin in our capability to deal with these things now.
Again, that's kind of really my experience in that I don't know the science of it, but I know I can feel the oxygen coming into my lungs different.
Yeah.
My heart rate is a lot slower now than when I started. There are a whole bunch of feelings I have in my body that I can't help but think that I could probably take medications to achieve that result, but it sure is more enjoyable to do it through exercise. Okay, well, this has been great. Now, we are a podcast that explores a whole bunch of different areas of wellness. And we ask our interview guests the same question in a context where we have these areas. We don't have enough time to keep them all going at any given time. So we do a mini wellness check-in. So David, are you currently neglecting an area of wellness in your life? And if so, can you think of even one activity you could do to foster wellness in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we only have so many hours in a day. And right now I'm really busy. I'm doing quite a lot of interviews. I'm doing a lot of articles which have been asked for me to do. And I've also got a couple of other projects which absorb my time. So I'm really stressed in terms of how much time I have. And I still work out. And this is the one area I neglect, which is my social activity. I have had to curtail that a little bit, even to the point where, my wife and I work from home. And sometimes we can go through the entire day, probably interacting with about 15, 20 minutes, which is terrible, but it's temporary.
Okay, well, social is actually one that we hear from a lot of our guests that's kind of floundering a bit. So hopefully you'll find time to spend a little more time with friends and family and get the social going a bit more. thanks very much. And we're going to have you back soon to talk about a different topic.
Thank you very much. It's been awesome.
We're glad you're here, and we hope you're making wellness a priority. Hope you're getting something out of the podcast. And especially for people who are new, you might not know that the podcast was inspired by my book, Accidentally Well by John Webster. It's available on Amazon, Indigo, Barnes & Noble, pretty much anywhere where you can buy books online. And this is my pitch for you to buy a copy and have a read. I think it'll enhance the experience of the podcast, and it will also help us defray some costs because it's really expensive putting out a podcast. So grab a copy if you can, and in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the show. It's me. Am I?
Yeah. Just let me say, flip side of the coin. John, I thought we could talk about love language. What do you think?
Well, it depends what that is.
Well, I saw this post and it had 5 different types of love language. And I thought that was really interesting because I do feel like you and I express love differently. And I think you have 2 of them and I have 2 of them that are mine.
I will try and talk about this.
Okay.
I like talking about more general topics than such personal ones, but I'll try.
Okay. So the topics are, there's 5. Physical touch, acts of service, gift giving, quality time, and words of affirmation.
Okay, so those are the different languages, and like, are there any examples?
Yeah, for sure. So for quality time, we have the no phone zone or being present.
Okay.
For gift giving, I mean, I think that one's pretty obvious. But remembering people's birthdays and, that kind of thing. And the service, cooking and cleaning, doing the dishes, that
one kind of jumps out.
Physical, I think that one's hugging, cut to kissing in that one. And then the words of affirmation.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all in play at a certain time, but I guess what you're asking if some of them are, if our personality leans towards one more than the other, or? Yeah,
for sure. But I also think that it's important to think about the way people express their love, because I just remember early in our marriage, I feeling like you weren't expressing your love to me because you weren't picking up your clothes or you weren't doing the dishes or doing the, you know what I mean? You weren't doing the things that I think is a way of expressing love.
Yeah. And then you get in a fight because I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like forever saying how much I love you, or I'm forever doing this.
And I'm like, words, actions speak language, actions speak louder than words, I'd always say. And we'd have these arguments about that. And then of course you probably are in the same boat with me. Yeah. I don't express, like I don't do the affirmations of love.
No, but it's more so like what I remember is something like, you never say you love me or something. I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? I literally said like, you're amazing and all this stuff like 100 times this week. And you're like, yeah, but you don't even say, yeah, but you're just, but now I get it. You're like, but you didn't pick up your clothes.
Right.
You didn't give me that quality time. Or,
right. Yeah. Like for me, quality time, it really is a togetherness that we're both in the same, kind of the same mode. Right. And for you, quality time sometimes is just being beside each other. Totally doing different things. But instead of not being on our phones, we're on our phones beside each other. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So that's not really quality time to me, but that, so I just think it's a great thing to think about when you're in a marriage. And have conversations about it. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So read them out one more time quick. I just want to try and say the 2 that I think you're closely related to. Okay. So the 5 are physical touch, acts of service, gift giving, quality time, and words of affirmation. Okay. I would say for you, I would see it as acts of service and gift giving. Yeah. I would say those are definitely mine because I love giving gifts and remembering birthdays. Yeah. And like not gifts per se financially, like expensive things. I just like doing things for people. Yeah. Like on everyone's birthday, you make them the favorite dinner and the favorite cake. And there's always like signs and stuff. Yeah, and then I try to your birthday and we're like, happy birthday, Sheila. Yeah, here. Yeah. Oh, happy birthday. Here's this. And I try and do what they like. Right. So I try and think of them as a person and if they're crafty or I try and do something crafty and definitely an acts of service. Like I think that is a love language. If I do your laundry, I fold it and I put it away and it's like, oh, isn't that nice that I did that? And, and I Okay.
like to let you do all that. That's my act of service. Exactly it. It's like, I'm going to let Sheila do all the work because that's the kind of nice guy I am.
Yes. Yours are definitely words of affirmation and physical touch. Like you talk a lot, actually. For people who...
Okay, let's not get carried away here.
Yeah, because
they don't have to know everything about us.
But it is interesting that people are like, oh, John is so quiet and he's and he is quiet and pensive, definitely. And in groups, you're even more quiet and pensive. But when it's just the two of us, you are very vocal. You talk a lot. You express a lot.
I am pretty vocal in groups. Like if I'm at a party or something or a get together, I do tend to tell lots of stories and stuff, but maybe not connecting as much, like just keeping a little bit of distance. Yeah. I'm working on it. I'm trying to get better at it. But
well, you're not very good at small talk.
I hate small talk.
Right. And you would like to express your opinion and give the grounds for it and the history of it before you know.
Well, it's not so much that.
Sometimes it's just a little too much for people to handle or for it to.
Actually, what I think I do is small talk, I do find almost like fingernails on a chalkboard.
Yes.
But as soon as somebody says something that's interesting, I like to say, oh, tell me more about that.
Right.
That's what I like. Not so much running on about all kinds of stuff, but finding someone who's got something interesting to talk about and then asking them about it.
Yeah.
And then, and I've got some experiences too, but because I also don't like when you bring something up and say, oh, I had this incident or I had this experience and something happened and someone's like, oh, well, I had that experience and it was even like tenfold.
Yeah. But don't you find that's always like that though?
I a lot of times.
Like generally, if you bring up something, they bring up something else that happened to them that might even not be relative.
Yeah. And like sometimes it's like, I want to talk about it just because something's bugging me and do you have some insight for me?
Right.
And so I'm like, hey, do you have here's this thing that happened. I'm not feeling that great. And the person's like, oh, well, this happened to me. It was even worse and blah, blah, blah. And it's like they never get back to saying anything about how they can get through it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we're digressing.
That's right.
Okay.
So love languages, especially in relationships, it's really great to, kind of talk about it and look at it. Because now when I'm doing my dishes and stuff, I don't think of it as, oh my God, I can't believe he didn't do these dishes. I think, oh, this is my love language. I'm going to do the dishes or I'm going to do this,
I just like the idea that it gives you something different to think about.
Yeah.
And it's meaningful context.
Please remember that we're not providing advice. We hope to inspire you to work towards balance, and we urge you to consult with qualified people if you need advice. The people on the show are speaking in their personal capacities. Their views expressed are their own, and don't represent the views or opinions of their outside contacts, their employers, or anyone else. We try to get things right, but we can't guarantee everything we say is correct, or that the things we talk about will work for you. Let's be well together, and let's be sure to do that in a safe way.
And it's sign-off time. It's Sheila here with John.
I'm here.
Hi, John. So a few things happened this week. We went to our condo for the last time in a while. So that was a little sad. We found out on Thursday that our condo is going to be rented. So this weekend, we got to spend our last weekend. It was really lovely, actually. Sunny, but not too warm. That was nice seeing Elise and Michael up there and Stephen as well. Number 2, I just got my bike out. So I'm going to start biking around.
Woo-hoo.
Really excited about that. And number 3, the Pope died.
That's true. Just yesterday.
So sad. So that's just another era. And he was a lovely Pope. And I just thought I'd mention that. And what about you, John?
I'll start with the first thing you said. It was really shocking, actually. I set up the Airbnb and Vrbo rentals. So, you set up all these specifications. And I, for some reason, had in my head that I had set that you'd have to get at least a week's notice. Mm-hmm. It's better if we rent it, but I had in my head that it just didn't seem like we were getting many nibbles. So we might have it for the whole spring until July. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of things I didn't do. And I was kind of had my heart set on going up there regularly. And then all of a sudden, poof, out of the blue, somebody rents it for 2 months.
So fast.
So I guess that happened. We don't have a place to go for 2 months in Collingwood. I guess we'll have to visit other people. I had my first outdoor interval run last week, which I go to this cemetery actually, and I run around the middle. And I was dreading it because I've gotten slow over the winter and all that stuff, but it happens all the time. I went there and I ran it. I didn't really worry too much about how fast I was going. I just increased my effort. Once around and then relax, once around and relax. It repeat. And I felt really great after. So that's given me a little incentive. And I really enjoyed the interview today, which you haven't heard yet.
No.
With David Amerland. He just said so many things that resonate well with me.
Yes, I'm really excited to hear it.
Including about how there's ways that exercise and working out helps. And it makes sense what he says, and it kind of goes along with how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
But until he said it, I didn't really realize it. Now I wonder if it'll be psychosomatic and it'll work even better.
Yeah.
So a good week. Hopefully one of these days we'll be able to get Elise back on to sign off once in a while.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, it's me and Sheila.
That is it for today's show. Please try and make wellness a priority.
You deserve it.
If you feel the need to talk to someone or ask for help, please do that.
Accept yourself for the person you are.
So long.
Adieu.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Goodbye.